You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating all things Jewish.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
Sometimes when you read the internet or newspapers, you will see a reference to Florida's 19th congressional district, and it's sometimes referred to as the country's most Jewish district in the entire nation, Broward and Palm Beach County, Florida. It is my great pleasure to be sitting with the congressman from the 19th district of Florida, Congressman Ted Deutch. Thank you so much for sitting with us for a few moments.
My pleasure, Mark. Thanks.
By the way, we'll talk about issues in one quick moment. What's interesting is you have a very profound Jewish background yourself. What kind of home were you growing up in? What kind of Jewish home?
I grew up in a Jewish home in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
I was, in many respects, the pro-Israel community in my high school. We had a very close-knit but small Jewish community, and we looked out for one another and spent a lot of my youth going back and forth to Philadelphia visiting my friends from summer camp, which was the other big piece of my Jewish experience growing up.
Did you ever get to go to Israel?
I did. For the first time, my first trip to Israel was when I was in high school.
It was? What do you remember about it?
I took that trip to Israel as with my friends from Camp Ramah, from my summer camp, and the opportunity for someone who grew up where I did to be in the land of Israel, in the Jewish homeland, had a profound impact on me then for that 6-week period that I was there, and really has since.
Congressman Deutch, the reason I ask is so much of your work, and by the way, you have there's a broad spectrum of interest that you reflect, both as you represent your own constituency and as you care about the United States of America. And you're very much involved in medical issues and health care and things of this nature. But there is a strong also element of caring about Israel and representing an American perspective on Israel in the House of Representatives. And I was just wondering, at what point does that develop in you and why?
It developed from the earliest age. Again, for an awful lot of people that I went to school with as a kid, I was the only Jew that they knew.
Okay. Yes, but you know there are many Jews, even Jews who grow up and they don't have another a Jewish community around them. They don't care about Israel. You care about Israel. Why?
I do, because I learned from my parents who had been involved in our small local Jewish community for years, at my synagogue, and then every summer when I was at summer camp, how central Israel is to the community, to the entire Jewish community throughout the world. And I felt a responsibility then, which I continue to feel even today now, unbelievably, as a member of the House of Representatives, to work tirelessly in support of now the U.S.-Israel relationship, Israel security. It's been a long and really interesting path of advocacy in a whole host of organizations along the way. Now I get to capitalize on all that experience in a different venue.
Very nice. And one more question along these lines. So you're a nice Jewish boy, and you decide you're going to go into politics.
Right.
First of all, how did your family feel about it, and what drew you into politics?
Right, that's a question it's a question my family still asks. I have, on the one hand, I think a lot of people were surprised. On the other, I'm one of those kids who I still sting from my loss in 5th grade when I ran for president of Spring Garden Elementary School. I've always loved politics, and I chose to get involved and to run for office because it presented me with an opportunity to work on the issues that I care so deeply, that I'm so passionate about, in a place where I could have a really significant impact. And my father served in World War II, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and taught me this, instilled in me really this sense of patriotism and service that I carry with me. And here was this opportunity to play that out in a really significant way, and I chose to do it.
That's a lovely story.
Thanks.
You also, before becoming a congressman, were in the Florida State Senate.
I was.
And under your leadership, Florida became the first state in America to really deal with divestment from Iran. I want to know how that came to be.
I've been attending pro-Israel meetings, as we've discussed. I've been involved in APEC and other organizations for years. The Iranian threat is not new. Their interest in nuclear weapons has been well known and well documented for years. So when I went to the Florida State Senate, a place where there is typically not a lot of foreign policy made, right. I looked for opportunities to continue to be involved in this issue. And what we realized is that the state of Florida, through its pension fund, was investing over $1 billion in companies who put their profits ahead of not just Israel's security, but ahead of our own national interest. And we wanted to shine a light on those companies, pressure them to withdraw from Iran. And we wrote legislation to divest our pension funds from companies who were investing in Iran's energy sector, also companies who were investing in the Sudan. Not surprisingly, the same companies, by and large, were investing in both places. In one case, we had a duty to stop a genocide that was happening. In another, we had an obligation to prevent genocide from happening, which is the fear, obviously, of Ahmadinejad has nuclear weapons. And representing a district with as many Holocaust survivors as I do, there was I felt a real obligation to do everything I can to give real meaning to the words "never again," and that's where that came from, and that's what we were able to do.
Was there much opposition?
There was considerable opposition from the pension fund managers who don't want to be told what to do. They don't want anyone interfering with their decisions where they believe their only focus should be on making a profit. We pointed out to all of my colleagues that it's not a particularly wise business decision to invest in companies who were doing business in these parts of the world that were so risky to begin with. So they had some opposition that we had to fight through. But when I was able to impress upon my colleagues the fact and remind them of the fact that most of the weapons that were being used, the IEDs that were being used against our troops in Iraq at that time, were coming from the Iranians, they understood that this was not just an issue of Israel's security, but our own national security as well.
Now, you take these concerns into the United States Congress as well. My understanding is that one of the things you've really been concerned with is the extent that there would be effective sanctions against Iran. Speak to me about, and as we meet, my understanding is the House of Representatives passed overwhelmingly a much stronger sanctions bill against Iran. The United States Senate, as we meet, it said it wanted to take a longer look at it. Even before we talk about you in general, give me your analysis of why this bill extending sanctions against Iran is being held up in the Senate.
I can't give you a reason. There's no good reason for the sanctions bill not to move as quickly as possible in the Senate. The House passed this legislation in December of last year. The Senate's been working on it, and they've been working on it in a productive way to actually make it stronger, so that we'll be able to come up with something that will maximize the impact. It is an open issue as we talk. My hope is that it will get resolved within days, not weeks or months. And it's imperative that we pass these tough sanctions so that the Iranians understand that their choice, if they choose to continue to proceed, is one of either proceeding with this program, in which case they face punishing sanctions that will cripple their economy even further than the existing sanctions have done, all the while knowing that military force continues to be on the table. We passed a resolution just this past week to make clear that American policy is one of prevention, not one of containment. So that's what they have ahead of them if they don't give up their nuclear weapons program, we need to make that choice very, very clear for them and very painful if they choose to continue.
And therefore, it is not a Democrat-Republican issue.
Oh, clearly not. There is the strongest possible bipartisan support for standing up to the Iranians. The resolution that passed this week, again, making clear that it is American policy to prevent the Iranians from acquiring nuclear weapons, passed in the House with over 400 votes in favor. There are not too many things that where that's the case. In the Senate, just a few months ago, the Senate passed further sanctions against the Central Bank of Iran by a vote of 100 to nothing. There is nothing else in the U.S. Senate that moves forward with total unanimity and focus and purpose like this has.
Congressman Deutch, I want you to address one of the more, sensitive discussions that occurs in the Jewish community. There's sometimes a feeling that the anti-Semitic position is the Jewish people in general, and APEC in particular as a strong lobby in Washington, controls, if not the world, American foreign policy. And as you go through your work and you go through the halls of Congress, to what extent is there any truth that in somehow APEC is pulling strings? And in general, speak about the extent to which the consensus you've just described to us on the issue of Iran, and it really has more to do with Iran, anti-Iran than pro-Israel, as you describe it. But take us through the discussions you have with people. To what extent is there any truth to the fact that APEC and the Jewish community is in some way manipulating Congress that there would be this overwhelming consensus on Iran?
Sure. Look at what APEC, look at what pro-Israel activists from all across the organizational world, look at what they do. They come to Washington, they volunteer their time, and they come to tell us, they don't need to tell me so much, but they spend time with my colleagues and with me talking about something that's really important to them. Well, what is it that they're explaining? They're explaining the situation that Israel faces as the one true democracy in the region, as such a wonderful example of what democracy can mean as a country that, surrounded by enemies, continues to flourish economically. And they explain all of the steps that Israel has taken to try to achieve peace, only to be rebuffed at every turn. All that pro-Israel activists do, just like anyone else who comes to visit me, is to advocate for a position. In this case, however, the reason that there is such strong support in support of Israel, and the reason that there is strong support in favor of cracking down on the Iranians and preventing them from acquiring nuclear weapons, is because the case is so compelling that it is in America's best interest to support our ally Israel, and it is in America's best interest to make sure that this government that talks about wiping Israel off the map and a world without the United States is never put in a position of having the weapons to be able to carry out some of the threats that they make. That's why they're successful. That's why there's such overwhelming support.
Does APEC do anything inappropriate in your view?
Oh, I think no. The role that pro-Israel activists play, again, there's all this attention paid to what happens in Washington and how members of Congress make their decisions. There is nothing. I think there's nothing more helpful than for a member of Congress to sit down with a group of his or her constituents who have come to tell this incredibly compelling story about this phenomenal country that's been able to thrive despite all of the rockets and missiles pointed against it, the terror attacks, the Iranian nuclear threat. For them to be able to come and tell that story, that's what members of Congress ought to do, is give their constituents that opportunity, and then they'll make their decisions.
You introduced an interesting piece of legislation. It was called the Palestinian Peace Promotion and an Anti-Incitement Act. Explain that to our audience.
Sure. One of the issues that comes up a lot in the context of peace negotiation, discussion of peace talks, is the fact that in order for there to be peace, in order for the Palestinians to show that they're committed to peace, they have to take certain steps that they've not taken. And ending incitement, changing their textbooks so that they acknowledge the existence of the State of Israel, stopping their programming that encourages violence against Israelis. Those are important steps that have to be taken before they can be considered a real partner for peace. And our legislation takes a step forward in making sure that any of the aid from the United States that is meant for the Palestinians, for security in the West Bank, to crack down on Hamas, that in conjunction with that aid, we have to look to make sure that they're living up to their responsibilities to stop incitement, and that's what the legislation aims to do.
Mm-hmm. Do you have at the moment any sense of optimism that there will be a change in rhetoric within the Palestinian community?
Unfortunately, we've not seen evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Israel last year, the day that they announced the reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas. Obviously a big step backward as we try to work toward peace. As long as there are discussions that include Hamas, an unrepentant Hamas that still calls for the destruction of the State of Israel, refuses to acknowledge the agreements that are in place, won't renounce terrorism, it's hard to see how there can be meaningful negotiations. That said, Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government, which is now the strongest government in the history of Israel politically, again, just when they formed this new government and broadened the coalition, reached out again and offered to sit down without any preconditions to negotiate peace, and they continue to be rebuffed.
Mm-hmm. You're a Democratic member of Congress.
Correct.
And I say to myself, look, it would be unreasonable for me to assume, and for our audience to assume, that whether I was talking to a Democrat or a Republican, that there's a certain party loyalty and a loyalty to the President of the United States who is Democratic. And yet you have seen all the things that are written about the current political situation from a Jewish perspective. One of the things that's written is that there's a concern within the Jewish community that the President of the United States made settlements an issue beyond the reality. That at one point it seemed to be his position that settlements were the major obstacle to peace. So I want to try to ask this question without putting you in an impossible situation.
Okay.
But I would like to know the extent to which you agree with those who would argue that the Israeli settlement policy on the West Bank is preventing peace from happening. To what extent do you feel uncomfortable with that analysis?
I don't believe that the only thing standing between peace in the Middle East and the situation that we have today is Israeli settlements on the West Bank. In fact, until there's some acknowledgement, which we know will come, that if there's going to be peace, there are going to be two states. Prime Minister Netanyahu has spoken openly about that. That's the direction. If, again, getting back to what I said before, if there's a party to negotiate with, then ultimately there will be two states. So what will those borders be for those two states? Everyone acknowledges that all of the neighborhoods surrounding Jerusalem, which are often referred to as settlements, that those neighborhoods, some of which, Ma'ale Adumim and other communities, are communities of tens of thousands of people, are going to be part of the State of Israel even after a peace agreement, if there's a peace agreement that's reached. There's going to have to be some acknowledgement of that fact from the Palestinians before there can ever be peace. This idea that a right of return, the Palestinians are claiming some right of return for Palestinians to move into these neighborhoods, which, again, I think people who study this issue, who are involved in these talks, know that these communities will continue to be and forever be part of Israel. That's what has to be addressed. And then add to that this notion that somehow East Jerusalem is occupied territory, that is to be returned. I happen to be sitting with you on Yom Yerushalayim, on the day that Jerusalem was reunified. and had occasion in Washington this past week to meet with Mayor Barkat, who was visiting the mayor of Jerusalem. The idea that East Jerusalem is going to be given to the Palestinians as part of some peace talks, to have that conversation, especially today when you think of the powerful images of the reunification and Moshe Dayan's incredible words when the holy sites were returned to the Jewish people, that I think is not a realistic direction, and to have those conversations is not particularly helpful to the process either.
Okay. You know, I think there are many in the Jewish community who want to hear something that goes like this. Of course, there are Arab Israelis and maybe later on Palestinian Arabs who will have the right to live in the state of Israel if there's a two-state solution. And the Jewish community wants to hear something from within the American administration, I'm not sure whether it's Congress or executive, that ultimately Jews should have the same right to live in the Palestinian state as Arabs, Palestinians have the right to live within the Jewish state.
I'm troubled by the suggestion that the only way that there can be two states is if the Palestinian state is Judenrein. That if the Palestinian state, the Jews are simply not allowed to remain. That's not going to advance the process. It is troublesome to say the least. There has to be, I think, an honest assessment of where people live and how that going forward. If there were to be a two-state solution, if there were to be a Palestinian state, the rights of Jews to live in that Palestinian state and what that would look like in terms of ensuring their protection, their security.
Is Hamas a terrorist organization?
Certainly.
Is Fatah a terrorist organization?
To the extent that Fatah continues to negotiate with Hamas, if there is that reconciliation, if they join forces with the terrorist organization, then it's going to be impossible for the U.S. to continue to behave toward Fatah the way that the United States has. At this point, there have been significant steps taken in terms of security on the West Bank, steps that have been taken by Fatah against Hamas to prevent terrorists from striking from the West Bank, to make the West Bank more secure. And I think those have been important steps, and that's the reason that there's been United States aid. That's the reason that Israel understands why it's important to offer that support.
At one point, the United States was giving a great deal of financial aid to the Palestinian Authority. There's some of the Jewish community who feel that once Hamas and Fatah make any kind of agreement, at that point it was inappropriate for the United States to continue to give money to the Palestinian Authority. And for a period of time, there seemed to be a freeze, which the president now has lifted. I want to know if you have any feelings on this one way or the other.
Yeah, I do. And to the extent that there is a government that is formed that includes Hamas, without Hamas taking the steps that the world has made clear they have to take in terms of recognizing agreements and recognizing Israel and forswearing terrorism. If that government exists, that's a government that we're in a very difficult position of dealing with. But at this point, despite these discussions about reconciliation, that government hasn't been formed. I'm not sure that they're ever going to get there. If they do, however, then sure, that calls into question our ongoing commitment.
Also, you know that there's so much discussion within the Jewish community, especially those who lean to the right and who support the Republican Party, who claim that the president has not been as supportive of the state of Israel, either, especially in statements, as prior presidents. And there's this feeling at the moment among some that those in the Republican Party are much more supportive of Israel than those in the Democratic Party, and that the president simply doesn't say or do all the things he needs to do. What would you say to our audience in this regard?
Well, the first thing I'd say, because people have asked me that question, especially the part of the question that suggests that somehow, as a Democrat, that I have some, I'm unable to support Israel as well as Republicans. the first thing I say is the reason that Israel has enjoyed the support that it has enjoyed and still enjoys on Capitol Hill is because support for the state of Israel has always been bipartisan. And we are doing a great disservice I believe, a great service to the state of Israel if we try to make support for the state of Israel just some political talking point. There's an obligation I think we all have to look at what's said and what's done. And that's true for me and members of Congress, and it's true for the administration. In the administration's case, I've heard some of these criticisms. I urge people to take a look, and I tell people they can make their own decisions, but at least they ought to be fully informed. And when we talk about statements that the president made, I suggest that people watch again the speech that the president delivered at the United Nations about the state of Israel and calling out Holocaust deniers, not at an APEC policy conference, not in front of a synagogue, but at a place that goes out of its way to, so many of its members go out of its way to try to delegitimize the state of Israel. It's a very powerful speech, very powerful statement, I think, from this president and this administration. I also encourage people to take a look at not the things that I say or that members of Congress said, but if you listen to what's said by the Israeli leaders, they'll tell you that in terms of the day-to-day cooperation between the IDF and the U.S. military, between the Israeli and U.S. intelligence agencies, that security cooperation right now at this moment has never been stronger. Security cooperation between the U.S. and Israel has never been stronger in the history of the state of Israel. And given so many of these threats that we've been talking about, that's vitally important. And so there is a lot to be explored that will be explored during the course of the campaign. As for me, I have to chuckle so as not to be offended by the suggestion that somehow there are those who would be more supportive of Israel because of their party affiliation. My response to them, as was my response just recently when I was asked the question, is I encouraged the questioner to reach out to some in Congress on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, to tell them that it would be extremely helpful for them to be as knowledgeable and as active and as passionate in defense of the state of Israel as Congressman Deutch is. And I think in that case, we might all focus our efforts and be a little more productive.
All right, another very sensitive issue. I don't believe that the Congress has any input onto whether clemency is given to Jonathan Pollard. But at the moment, that's a very hot issue in the Jewish community. Right. Do you have any feeling on this matter?
I do, and Congress offers its input about a year and a half ago now. A number of colleagues and I joined together in a letter to the president to encourage clemency. I've been very clear about my position. I think for a whole host of reasons, it makes sense given the sentence that Pollard has served already, given the condition of his health, that clemency is appropriate now. As I said, I made that position clear soon after I arrived in Congress, and continue to express that position. He was guilty of the most serious crime that could be charges that could have been leveled against him. No one is disputing that. It is a question of the duration of his term and the time that he has served already, the condition of his health. Those are the reasons that I think suggest that clemency is in order, and I've made that position clear.
Okay. It has been an absolute joy meeting you. I've said to you, there are a few people who are as articulate as you are, and you also are just a lovely human being. I wish you, in the tradition we say, Kol Tuv V'Hatzlacha, only success. I have no idea what your plans are, whether you plan one day to continue to run for office, maybe other office, maybe Senate, and maybe national office, but it would be really wonderful if the entire nation at one point had the benefit of your leadership. All the best.
Thank you.
Congressman, thank you very, very much for being
Mark.
here.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
And that was my meeting with Congressman Ted Deutch, Congressman for the 19th District of Florida. I hope you enjoyed hearing what he had to say, and as always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts or comments you may have. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.